Ryan, thanks for coming on the show today. Super excited to chat about Gaidge and the orthodontic market.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story, at least for me. Maybe not for others, but for me, it's a fun story. I started off as a finance guy, so I really love data and analytics, right? That was my undergrad degree. And I ended up going over to Intel and did budgets and planning and financial analysis for manufacturing facilities for the first 4 or 5 years of my career. Then I went back to, and I I had a stint at Ernst & Young as well, managing kind of some of the finance stuff that they had done for their engagements for their auditors and their partners. Then I went back to Georgetown to kind of make a career switch, so to speak. I got my MBA there and moved into more strategy, marketing. And that from that standpoint, I went to 3M. And so 3M kind of brought me on this journey to where I was able to work across, at that point, 3M had 7 big businesses across 42 different industries. And I was able to work across the disciplines of marketing, strategy, business development, to really understand and to make that career transition. The great thing about it is these were little 2 to 3 month consulting opportunities for the first 2 years. There was a group of us all out of MBA school that came in and did that. And then through that process, you kind of figure out what industry you want to go into and what discipline you want to go into. And so I ultimately ended up in the dental space. And so I ran the restorative portfolio for 3M from a marketing standpoint. And that led me to be a regional sales manager. So it was the first time I got to get out into the field and basically manage a bag of a bunch of different reps, which was kind of cool. And that led me to Orthodontics, which I ultimately transitioned from that regional sales manager position into the vice president of sales for North America for Ormco. So that was about 2013. So I do have a long history now in the dental / ortho space, primarily ortho over the last 10, 11 years. And so, that led me, did that for 2 or 3 years. And then I was the vice president of global marketing for Ormco. And then at that point, I was traveling a lot. I had young kids at home, and I felt like it was an opportunity. When Mary Beth Kirkpatrick, founder of Gaidge, her and I started a conversation, and it was an opportunity to come manage the Gaidge business, which was, it had already been a startup, but it was kind of in its infancy and could basically give us an opportunity to go see where we could grow the business. So I packed up the family. We were in Sacramento, California. We moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And that was about 7 years ago, and took a big risk. I would say, call it back in 2016, I would never even think about going entrepreneurial and taking such a risk, and actually doing it has been one of the greatest things that I've done professionally and personally. So it's a really cool story there. Then we, the Gaidge gave us an opportunity to, grow the business. And then I brought over a few folks from my Ormco days as well to help run marketing and sales with Jake and Suzanne. We had Katie here, who is Mary Beth's daughter. So kind of the 5 of us collectively helped build the company with our consulting group, with Jessica and Shannon. And so it was a really cool opportunity, I think, to kind of work with your friends, but also build a business. And so we were able to, I think, over that first 5-year period, just really build an imprint into the orthodontic space. And with data and analytics, this is where my career background kind of comes full circle, being that finance person at the beginning, allowed me to leverage, I was always on the clinical side with 3M and Ormco, allowed me to get back on the business side, which is where I feel like I have much more insight and expertise versus the clinical side, and, help grow the business there. And then a couple of years ago, we did transact with a private equity firm, and we're now part of a bigger group called Practice Tech. And so Practice Tech is basically focused on retail healthcare. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to, with Practice Tech, kind of move a lot of small entrepreneurial companies into over a $200 million business that has 4 different distinct verticals. I do currently now manage the dental ortho vertical, and we have 7 brands that roll up under that opportunity. And Gaidge is definitely a huge piece of that portfolio, and is part of data intelligence and business insights, and what we're able to provide to the orthodontic business owner and practice has been a really fun journey.
That's really cool. Also, just on the Practice Tech side, being able to, I guess, scale faster and use a lot more resources that a larger company would have to help a startup. So what was that transition like?
Back when we did transact, Gaidge was primarily just an analytics platform. And so being part of Practice Tech, now we have 19 different brands across those 4 verticals that I mentioned. But we've now been able to implement, some different technologies within the Gaidge platform. So for example, we have a company called IntakeQ that's in the portfolio, and all they do is digital patient forms. And so now that is basically white labeled into Gaidge as our
Yeah.
Gaidge Forms platform. So we're able to leverage, that part of the platform and provide that to the orthodontist, which has been great. We've also made an integration with the accounting platforms with Xero and QuickBooks. And so now not only can you get the operational data that we pull with Gaidge that comes out of the practice management system, but we also now have the accounting level data. So that gives us a lot of insights. And I think as we go deeper into this podcast, we can kind of share, what that looks like and how, doctors are able to get more insight into their practice, kind of combining those two pieces of information. And then recently we've launched our Gaidge Consult Manager, which basically is a tool to help give total control of the new patient conversion process from when that patient calls to managing them through the practice. And that's, as we get into the business model of orthodontics, that's a key piece where you can see a lot of leakage in your practice with patients just kind of slipping through the cracks. But kind of having a CRM tool, so to speak, to move them from that new patient experience all the way to their collecting their first payment is another module that we brought on. So I think the power of Practice Tech has enabled us to move faster and create just a more robust business intelligence tool for the market to be able to take advantage of.
What is Gaidge exactly? How would you just describe it in 10 seconds, one sentence?
It's a business intelligence tool that allows an orthodontist to run their practice more efficiently. I know more than 10 seconds here, but if you can imagine pulling data out of your practice management system, a lot of times that could be manual and you have to do a lot of analysis. Gaidge automates that process and then visualize and charts and graphs it to where that you can see where your practice is performing very, very quickly. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what Gaidge does.
What do you guys see? Orthodontists, obviously they're very busy individuals. A lot of them are having to manage and also be in the clinic and also think about things like payroll or marketing. Some of them we found are doing their own marketing or, approving time off requests, all this stuff. I would imagine, and I've talked to a lot of orthodontists where this is the case, where there is a big gap in looking at these metrics and being able to understand them. Maybe they don't have them. They work with an accountant who maybe does some things a couple times a year, but they really don't know where they're at or how to leverage data to be able to move forward in the best way. What do you guys see?
I would agree with that. At the core, an orthodontist is a practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
They don't teach them the MBA skills of running a business in ortho school, in residency. So that's where, industry partners like ourselves, we feel that we can be a great resource for those orthodontists to be able to. And I think, too, looking at all the different data that you have in your practice can be extremely overwhelming.
Oh, yeah.
And so what Gaidge is hopefully trying to do with the orthodontist is take that in and distill that down into bite-sized chunks, right? And so when we take that data, you can go mine your practice management system. You're going to pull out the raw data. You're going to have a data analyst look at it. What key performance indicators are you looking for? Gaidge was designed through Mary Beth Kirkpatrick and her consulting team to kind of cut to the chase, so to speak, right? They have been in thousands of practices, and so they know what to look for, what good looks like. And so the key performance indicators that actually get rolled up within Gaidge are driven by consultants that have been in these practices, and not only just Mary Beth's group, but she partners with, and now Jessica's running the group, with all the other consultants in the industry. And so there's a collaboration going on there as far as what should be tracked, what should be measured in order to be able to course correct or improve that. So that does hopefully simplify the process of running your business as an orthodontist, because you have the access to the information in a much more seamlessly visual, quicker way than having to go gather it yourself and analyze it yourself. We kind of do the work for you, so to speak.
What are some of those main KPIs that you guys bring to the forefront?
If we're going to start simple, you think about just the orthodontic workflow from the beginning is obviously it's production collection, right? That drives your business. But then when you get into the patient funnel, it's okay, how many new patient phone calls did I get? How many of those did I convert to come in for an exam? And then ultimately, how many of those did I start? And so along the way, there's more sophistication within that. If people go to observation, how do you manage those observation kids that aren't necessarily ready right now, so that when the time comes, you make sure you maximize pulling them into a start? And then once you do get them into a start, how do you treat them efficiently so that your clinic can run on time and you can maximize the profitability within your clinic. So we've done a lot of analysis, and I go back to what I said before. We have the operational data coming out of Gaidge, and we combine that with the accounting level data, which talks about the expense side of the house. And when you put that together and you put it through a multilinear regression model, you can quickly identify certain push points within a practice of what you should be focused on in order to drive the most profitability. So at a very basic level, though, it's about production collection, new patient adds into exams, into starts, and then ultimately, how efficiently are you treating patients, or what I would say would be kind of the starter kit to get going in your practice and understand kind of where you stand there. And then you can get more sophisticated off of that.
Some of the things that I've seen, and we have over 200 practices active with us, and a lot of those are on Gaidge. And so to be able to look at our side of data and then the Gaidge side of data, it really paints the complete picture.
100%.
Even things like referral sources, case acceptance within demographics, teens, adults, just a lot of things that understanding where we're winning or maybe where we need to tighten things up. It's literally at your fingertips. You can look at this data real time, and it's really the truth. The thing that I like about it is we can all feel things as business owners. Well, I feel like this is what's going on. But with the data, you can actually look and paint the real story and know exactly where to drill down.
Yeah, and even to your point, to get more sophisticated on that patient funnel, like we know adult child exams. We know how many, what's that ratio? Then we also know start type. So is it a bracket and wire start? Is it a phase one? Is it phase two? Is it an aligner? If it's a phase one, is it an appliance aligner, or is it an appliance phase one, or is it an aligner appliance for phase one? Same thing for phase two. And then aligners, is it adult child? Like what's the spread there? For full starts as well, is it adult child as well? So we have that granularity. So if you're looking at your practice, and we even look at, okay, during COVID, adult starts spiked through the roof. Like on average, they're around 6% growth year over year. During COVID, they ramp up to 24%, right? What happens? It's a Zoom effect. We're all looking at ourselves in a camera all day, and we're like, oh, wow, I better get to the orthodontist and fix that, right? So, that becomes a phenomenon. Now, it lasted for 18 months maybe, but, in the last 2 years, we've seen adult starts just completely fall off the cliff. They're negative now. So, and then you start looking at aligner growth. Obviously, aligners are still extremely healthy in the space, continuing to grow. But year over year, we're not necessarily seeing, the aligners do what they did in the past as a function of some of those those adult patients that aren't necessarily coming into the practice. So, just some different dynamics that I think has changed over the past, couple of years as a function of COVID and kind of where we're at. But ultimately, it's still a very healthy industry, but there's some definite changes that are on the horizon that, definitely need to be understood. And I think that's where you kind of come back to, do you know the numbers of your business? Are you able to manage that? And then do you look at that more do you have a process for that? Do you look at that on a weekly, monthly basis? Do you have a review with your team? Because if you look at it, to your point earlier, every half year or once a year, like that, you're not going to be able to make changes based on that. You're just going to get what you have.
And the cool thing about Gaidge too is you can set your goals inside of the platform to be able to measure against where you are and where you want to be. Again, and I'm not trying to bash anybody, but and we even find this in our own business, it can be very hard to take the time to set goals, but if you don't have a goal, what are you actually working towards? You're kind of just coasting. I love that feature too. And I think for the people listening who are a Gaidge user, but maybe not using that function, that would be something really good to do just so you can track towards something and rally the team around it.
100%. Yeah. And it's a great point that you mentioned so take that a step further. Obviously you can set goals within the Gaidge system, and you can track that on a daily basis. So it also gives you like a progress bar of where at. So if you want to do 20 starts a month, every single day, it's going to show you how many starts did you do, and then what percent are you to your goal. Taking that a step further to set goals, to your point, we have a projections module as well. So all of your history that you have within the Gaidge system, now, if you're going to look at setting goals for 2025, you can see what your run rates are, and then that will give you kind of an understanding of like, where are you going to perform? And then you can start using a slider bar that's in the projections tool and says, okay, I grew at 6%. I want to see if I can grow at 10%. So if I grow at 10%, what does that mean? That means I have to have X number of new patient calls, and then my conversion rate from patient call to exam is X to Y. That's going to cascade me to this many new exams, and then my conversion rate into a start is this, and it's going to cascade me into that. So
Hmm.
that we all have that opportunity as well, to take that goal setting a step further, but using data analytics projections in order to really kind of guide you and enable you to be able to scenario play, so to speak, how that works. So it's a really cool tool that's probably a lot of folks don't even know about within the system that you can leverage.
Yeah, it's interesting with us because obviously our history has been marketing, but now it's really marketing and education and a bit of practice management as well. And there's a software piece. But because of that, there's a lot of focus on that first part of the funnel, attracting. When we start to get into things and when we have access to Gaidge, we can see that case acceptance or conversion rate. And in a lot of practices, this year, the past 2 years or so has been pretty tough, comparatively speaking, getting used to that crazy growth after COVID. And they may not really be aware of the conversion rate and how far it's dipped. And so we've been able to look at that process and say, I go back to sports, like what do athletes do? They watch film constantly. So getting teams to listen to the new patient phone calls, getting teams to watch the consultation process and objectively just look at, well, how could we do this better? And as we start to refine that, then you can start to see that trend upwards within Gaidge. And so that's been huge too, not just focusing on that first part of the funnel, but being able to use Gaidge to bring education and training and coaching and really transparency all the way through that new patient funnel.
Yeah, and it used to be a badge of honor that I had a 3-week wait time to get a patient in for an exam.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to lose them now because everyone's shopping, right? So, I mean, that's another key metric is that when that patient calls, how fast can you get them in for an exam? Because a lot of times they probably are looking at a couple of different orthodontists. So you want to be the first to
Mm-hmm.
create that relationship and win them and capture them right there. So,
Yeah, and I think when I was talking to Jake, he mentioned if it's over 10 days, they may not even show up at all.
yeah.
We advise people like get it within 72 hours, that exam scheduled. And if you can't, maybe even introduce a virtual option, but it's a small window.
OrthoFi has some really good data on just exam leakage. And so they
Mm.
have some cool graphs on looking at as time wears on, how that falls off the cliff.
Even you mentioned phones. I think Jamie Reynolds told me when they go look at a practice on average, it's anywhere from 20 to 40% of new patient calls are missed. That's a huge leak in the bucket.
Mm-hmm.
If you're down this year, you're listening, you're watching, really doubling down on, am I making the most of every single opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
So huge.
100%. And there's a lot of AI tools now, even on the front end, that'll help, with
Yep.
those, make sure you don't miss those calls as well, which is
Hmm.
nice, to be able to, if there's not a human there, that at least you can kind of start to get them in their funnel. Because yeah, that's the one thing that we look at is that you don't even get net back with a lot of these patients as a function of just your systems and processes. You
Yep.
have all those tightened up and buttoned down to make sure that
Yep.
you're maximizing the opportunity.
You talked a little bit about COVID. What did COVID create now in the aftermath? What are we looking at within orthodontics?
We do a rates of change model. So like when I'll do some lectures, and basically what we're comparing is what is a 3-month rolling average compared to a 12-month rolling average. And when you compare those two line graphs, you want the 3-month average to be above the 12-month. And that's just kind of a sign of growth, health, those types of things. So if we looked this data back all the way to kind of pre-COVID in 2019 or 2018, 2019. But if we look at the orthodontic industry leading up to COVID, there's a lot of stability there, that it grows between 0 and 5% and just oscillates within that range really tightly. And so on average, if that's 0 to 5, it's 2 to 3% average growth. That's kind of what the industry does or has done in the past. Then we hit COVID and you see the rates of change models spike, right? So we see data that, we've never seen, and we're not normalizing against the shutdown either. We kind of make sure that we take that information out and compare it against actual data so we can see true growth rates. But in back half of 20 and 21, we saw growth for a good 18 months. That was 15, 20, 25% net production. And we've never, at least in my history, we've never seen that type of growth in an orthodontic space, period. And then as we got into the back half of 21 or even into 22, it kind of fell off the cliff a little bit. So I think going all the way back to September of 21 is when the 3-month rolling fell below zero. And so, and then I will say between now and then, if you look at the chart, it's a very tight window there, but it's oscillating between -3 and 0. So the shift before was between 0 and 5. The last, call it 24 months, have been maybe more than that, 30 months have been between -3 and 0. And it's in that tight range too. So we have stability back, but we're not necessarily seeing growth. But if you look at the compound average growth rate over that 6-year period, what used to be probably 3 to 4%, 2 to 3%, 2 to 4% is now like 1.5% growth because of that big spike and then the history. But if you look at it over the last 2.5 years, you're in negative territory, flat to slightly down. So that's kind of the impact of where we are as a profession right now.
Maybe even looking into the future, are there any type of models or predictions you guys are looking at for the next 2, 3, 5 years?
We tie a lot in some of the lectures to some of the economic trends and key indicators that we see out there. And I would say last year, we look at 4 different phases, whether it's in recession or growth or slowing growth. And a lot of those key economic indicators, and a couple of them that we follow pretty closely, are around the financial markets, housing, wholesale trends. And those have kind of gone through that recessionary period and now on the growth back up. So that's a positive. Some of the other leading indicators, you have hard landings when you get into recession. You have soft landings where you just kind of go from slowing growth to back to growing, or declining growth to back to growing. So I will say, if we look at, we benchmark this with ITR Economics, and we look at their kind of current economy. And I would say there's a lot of healthy signs as far as some of the key performance indicators or key leading indicators are kind of going through that soft landing. And then the big ones, which is financial and housing, are kind of coming out of those recessionary periods into more accelerating growth for financial, and then starting to grow for housing. So that's positive. Now, I do think that for the back half of this year, and July, this year has actually been pretty interesting because of the calendar. And so with the leap year and the way the calendar has fallen, the days aren't matching up. So we're seeing a lot of big gyrations in the monthly numbers. So you'll be up 8%, you'll be down 8%. And so over time, though, as we look at this now that we have July's data, July was actually a double-digit growth month. Why was that, right? We had 2 extra days in July this year versus last year, accounting for 4th of July and stuff like that. So every day is probably worth 5 points. So you get 2 extra days, you get 5, 10, you're up double digits. But year over year now, as we look through 7 months of data, the industry is pretty flat. So it was flat to negative as of last month. And as we go through July, now we are kind of flat to barely positive on the key indicators. And I look at net production, net collection, new patient exams, new patient calls, new patient exams, and starts. Those 5 things, I kind of look at all that. And they all seem to be within a very narrow range of each other. So we're seeing, the good news is after a very strong July, we're seeing the industry is at least positive now, where I mentioned before, we've been kind of stuck in this -3 to 0 range for the last 30 months. So that's a good news as far as seeing this over the last, 7 months at least. So I'm hopeful for that. I think, there's still probably some headwinds with inflation that we're going to have to deal with. The back half of the year, interest rates are still there. There's another graphic that we have on just median American household disposable income. It's about $94,000. And if you start peeling out, what's after taxes, and then when you spend it on housing and all the other fixed expenses that you have, what's left over to spend on discretionary is about $9,000. So, you think about going into an orthodontic office. Okay, I got to spend 5 to 6. I've got 9 to spend for the average American household. With all the inflation, I mean, look what it's costing you to fill up your car, what it's costing you to go to a restaurant, to buy groceries, you name it. It's just, everything's just skyrocketed, right? To pay your electric bill. So there's less disposable income out there, I believe, now to be able to drive folks into an orthodontic office. So we're kind of fighting those headwinds. It'll be interesting to see, obviously, with the election, where that goes, as far as what does that do to the economy and inflation. There is at least predictive with the ITR and the economists is that 25 and 26 should be pretty good growth years. So I think there's some optimism for the next 2 years that we'll have a good deal of growth. We've been kind of in this flat to down range, since kind of COVID settled itself out. I think the rest of this year is probably going to be a little rinse and repeat of last year, which was flat to down. And then we hopefully 25 and 26 are projected to be some growth years.
That's definitely something to look forward to. And while a number of people may be experiencing being down or flat, it is interesting. Like you said, there's months where, you'll be up 8% and then down 8%, a bit of a sporadic type of response with the practice and growth. But what we find too is it's also kind of sporadic, and there's pockets where markets seem to be just doing really well versus maybe a market a couple hours away. We've seen partners even grow in Southern California where maybe they were just under leveraging things that they could actually do to move the needle. But by and large, like the Gulf Coast area, we have a partner in Baton Rouge, huge growth. So it's interesting to see where some of these markets, people are just continuing to grow and expand and they're not really feeling it. And then you have the practice that's down 10%, So it is pretty interesting where it's really based on location, we find. And also, are there things that practices weren't doing at all? Like maybe a practice wasn't even marketing and they started aggressively marketing, putting some key roles in the practice, looking at stats like missed phone calls, conversion rate, and they're up significantly.
I know you're looking probably when you look at your partners, you're looking at, one or two different practices, maybe. I don't know if it's statistically significant, as far as having 30 plus, and some of our aggregate averages, they have over 30 to 100 practices to show kind of aggregately what's happening. And I would say in those pockets, right, you're always going to find folks that are leveraging the tools or running their business at a different level or leveraging data analytics, marketing, a lot of the services you guys provide as well to grow your business. And I guess that I kind of go back to that on message is that in this day and age with the competitiveness that's out there, and I know I don't have the data for it, but anecdotally, we're seeing the GPs are taking more and more orthodontic starts just as a function of them, being able to do that. And you go to the dentist twice a year and they just keep you in house there versus refer you out like they used to do, right? Like I said, I don't know the true impact, but I anecdotally hear that it's having an impact. So to your point, when you have your business and you're looking at all the different processes and systems and how you're going to get patients to call you and then into your practice and then treat them, it's really important to have those systems down and have those partnerships down to make sure that you're managing your business as effectively as you can, considering the changing dynamic that we have out there.
Well, as we start to maybe wrap up, is there anything that I didn't hit or prompt you with that you want to bring up or talk about?
The biggest thing that I see, as you kind of unpack the patient funnel, you leveraging the data analytics, I always go back to that because, and I know you guys do such a wonderful job on the front end of pushing patients into the practice, and you have a lot of data and analytics with your practice beacon around that to really provide that. And so I always recommend, from an orthodontic perspective, you've got to have some sophistication in your marketing. There's a lot of it now that's been digitized, right? And you guys do a great job with that. We had some data on some persona-based marketing opportunities. I know we've talked to you all about that. We're not the marketing group to do something with it, but we can definitely pull that. So there's opportunities out there that practices can take advantage of really kind of getting streamlined and specific when it comes to how they go and approach the market. And I know you guys do a great job of helping them there. But then once you start getting that patient into the funnel, I think we look at a metric called the new patient exam to patient call ratio. And so a lot of times, if we look at this in aggregate across the single doctor practices, that we expect about a 10% fall off. And so if you think about, I had 100 patients call me and 90 came in for an exam, we would expect that. But we're seeing only about 80 are coming in for an exam. So if you start to play that out, you're losing those 10 from 80 to 90 that are, for whatever reason, not coming to your practice. That's 10 that you don't get an at bat. You start to do math on that at a 70% conversion rate at $5,000. Quick math could be somewhere close to 50 grand. Now, that's just a small example. You start cascading that up to the average orthodontic practice that's on Gaidge. This could be a couple $100,000 a year. So I think it's really important as you move through the patient funnel, not only on the front end with what you all do, but then once that patient comes into the practice, how do you get them into an exam? And then how do you get them into a start? Another offshoot of that is the OBS opportunity. And within Gaidge, all of the OBS patients are classified by age. And so if you go in and you can see, okay, in my OBS group, I have, let's say, 400 patients that are in observation. But I also know the age ranges for the buckets of each one of those. So, the data that I've looked at aggregately is that 57% of them are 11 years or older. So if you think about that, that is a happy hunting ground for you to go make sure that you're pulling those patients into your practice versus just letting them kind of sit within your practice management system. So what are you doing with your observation program to really mine that and understand where they're at, right? And then you're supposed to see a certain amount every month. That's not being seen. And then a third of them haven't even been seen in 12 months. So are they even your patient technically? Have they moved on? So there's like low hanging fruit, I think, throughout the whole system that can enable a practice to drive more starts. And then I talked earlier about us having call it a multilinear regression model. We took the operational data and we move it with the expense data. And so it comes up with three things that you should be focused on: is starts per day, value per visit, and then managing expenses. And so a lot of what I've been talking about today is about starts per day. How do you get more and more starts into your practice? Then value per visit goes into how effectively and efficiently can you treat your practice, your patients, right? So if you're spending 30 months with them and 25 visits, then you're not being efficient because every visit time is money, is costing you. So do you have a metric and do you have a way to understand, with the technology you're using, with the appliances you're using, like how fast can you move them through? Because statistically, it's proven that for every a point or every dollar of value per visit that you can save is helping you gain more profitability in your practice. And then expenses is the third vector of this whole thing. And then if you look at, just your big five buckets, which is kind of staff, it's your clinical, it's marketing, it's your office expenses. How much are you spending on staff as a percentage of net collections, right? Is that high or low comparison to the benchmark, right? And then the more digitized you get, the better your value per visit gets. Can you be more efficient with staff spend? And I'm not advocating here to go have layoffs or anything, but another big thing outside of COVID is that it's harder to gain staff and there's a lot more employee turnover. So as you become more efficient and you do get turnover, do you just not backfill them, right? And then now I can get my staff as a percent of collections from 24% maybe down to 20% because I have overall less appointments because I'm more efficient with my treatment modality. So, as you start to really unpack this at a much deeper level than just looking at production, collection, new patient exams and starts and new patient calls, like there's a lot of nuances in the finance that's behind the scenes that can really help drive profitability at a much higher level. So, that's kind of where I think our consulting team and Gaidge, as you get deeper into the tool, can really help you from a practice perspective.
Yeah, so many things come to mind as you're talking, and just at a high level, I talk to a lot of orthodontists and dentists across the country. And there's really maybe two buckets I put them in, which is there's the reactive group who just kind of rides the waves of highs and lows. Technically nothing wrong with that if that's okay with you. But then there's the side that they do set goals, they do set targets, they do work on leadership, they maybe work with consultants, and they're growing, but there's still opportunities for them to double down on certain things or maybe uncover certain things. Like because of that growth, they maybe get a little comfortable, and it's like, well, how do we keep this growth going is really how they should be thinking. And what's our new patient phone call? Or are we answering every call? Are we responding to every message? Are we following up with people? To your point, and I think it's the consult manager tool, when people go into pending, what is that process? If they're not setting a start date or they're not same day starting, how are we following up with them? What is that experience like? How's it tracked? Where is it tracked? What's the messaging? All of that stuff.
And there's statistics too on just, obviously a same day start is 100% closure rate, right? They're there. You get them in the and then you get a same day contract, you got like a 98%. And then if you're starting to follow up, you're moving down the funnel, and pretty soon you're flipping coins as far as, are you going to get that patient in or not at 50%? So that's the critical piece, is just, and that's why I say, just even from a marketing perspective, to getting the patient in, to that new patient call to exam ratio, into a start, managing your observation, and then the treatment efficiency, that whole piece has to have processes and systems behind it to maximize your profitability and maximize your patient starts across the funnel.
And I think it's important to understand consumers, because people can come in, have a great experience, and there can be the belief, well, I don't want to, hard sell anything. So we're not going to do same day starts, and we'll just give them the information and see what happens. Again, nothing necessarily wrong with that, but what if we just changed our mindset on sales, and sales was actually helping somebody? Because that's exactly what it is. If you do good work and you 100%. Operate with integrity. So understanding that consumers today have changed. And just like you said, somebody with the greatest intention of, I want to get braces or I want to get Invisalign, even someone like myself, if I come in and the process is still set, in old systems of, we'll just give you the information, we'll see if you call us back. I am so busy, and people these days are inundated with Instagram, TikTok, text messages. I mean, I can't even tell you how many spam phone calls I get in a day, and we just forget. I find myself sometimes missing text messages to confirm appointments with people who I've been doing business with for years, and it's that natural part of we are in the information age and just inundated with all this stuff coming at us everywhere. And so make the most of the opportunity when somebody is in front of you, that human to human element. If they're right there, maybe just tweaking the process and making it better and really valuing that person's time, because it seems to be getting less and less.
That's what I was going to say is they probably would appreciate it because of the busyness factor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I have to come back in for one more appointment, or can I have a same day start? And can we get started? Can we do all this stuff today? Because the old school model is, okay, I have a consult and I come in, and then I'm going to set my start date, 2 weeks later, a month later, whatever it is. But if I could knock those 2 appointments out now because I'm here, I've taken off work, got the kid out of school, here I am as a parent, right? It's much easier. And they, like I said, I think they'd appreciate it if that,
totally.
And it's not to be as the TC on that side, not to be fearful to ask for the sale. I mean,
right.
Literally have to ask for it. And there's language that you can do that softens that, but also hooks them in.
And I think you have to zoom out and look at what's driving the market. And when you look at things like streaming platforms like Netflix, when you look at Amazon Prime with 2-day shipping, Uber Eats, DoorDash, the list goes on. And also with social media, it's like literally the world's at your fingertips with an iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to understand that is the shift, and there's nothing we're going to do to change it. Like, we're not going to change tech. We're not going to change consumer behavior. And it's even getting more automated with AI.
Yeah.
And so we have to change our business to be able to respond to that in a positive way, be proactive, and just embrace change, because it's going to happen.
I mean, it's an instant gratification world, right? And sadly, the technology has made us all more impatient. And I think we all, we need those dopamine hits, right? With
totally
alerts and texts and all that other kind of stuff. But it's changed the human race to a degree as far as how we communicate, react, respond. We're not patient anymore. I mean, I know I suffer from it, and I don't necessarily like it about myself, but I need to be more calm and patient and just relax in the moment versus I got to get on to the next thing, right? So as a consumer, it's absolutely something you got to take into consideration.
Before we go, I want to read something that orthodontist sent me, Dr. Carter Thomas. He's used Gaidge for a number of years. They're in Mobile, Harvey and Thomas, and they have been a hip partner for about 1.5 years. And I think this is really key for people to understand who may work with us or they're thinking about it, and they also work with Gaidge, how it can kind of work together. So he says, if an orthodontist wants to optimize their entire practice's performance, they need software on 2 main fronts. First, you need software like Practice Beacon from Hip Creative, which helps you manage new patient starts. Practice Beacon organizes and manages leads, the new patient phone call process, tracking the new patient journey. It helps you efficiently handle these aspects, ensuring more new patient exams are scheduled and providing a great patient experience. After that, you need to track the performance of the practice, and that's where Gaidge comes in. Gaidge allows you to efficiently analyze critical numbers to make informed management decisions, such as evaluating conversion rates, productions, collections, and identifying what is or isn't working across the entire practice. In essence, Practice Beacon is excellent for prospecting new patient opportunities and ensuring they don't fall through the cracks, while Gaidge excels in real-time retrospective analysis, helping you track and evaluate your performance. He goes on to finish, using both really prevents that leaky bucket. So any thoughts around that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a lot of what we've talked to today. So, just to reiterate, having, any corporate business has business reviews. They have metrics that they track, and they look at it on a frequent basis. So, the great thing about the orthodontic market is that if just the basic business model is very lucrative from a profitability standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think,
totally.
if you look at average orthodontist, you do $1.5 million, 2 million, maybe higher. And then your overheads, maybe 60% is kind of what the industry averages say. So you're putting 40 cents of every dollar into profit. That's a lot of money. But if you're also at that level of $1.5 million, 2 million, every 1% change is a very, very significant amount of cash, just to give to your teams, to build your own wealth, however you want to distribute that. Right. And I've been introduced before on stage with Gaidge, and the doctor said, before I use Gaidge, I would just look at my bank account and I had money in it, and that was cool. And then now that I actually manage my metrics, I have a whole lot more money in it as a function of that. So I think, and we do, with our overhead module where we look at our executive module where we look at all the overhead, we'll run Pareto's, and, there'll be efficient doctors that are in the, call it 40 to 45% overhead. And then it'll range up to 75, 80%. So they're only making 20 cents on the dollar, right? And then you'll go look at, okay, you peel that onion back and it's like, okay, I'm spending 35% on my staff, or my clinical and lab is 25% when it should be 15. Is there awareness for that, or even aware? And if you're looking at it once a year, you can't make any adjustments. But if you look at it monthly or weekly, you can start to understand where you're at. So I think, just going back to, like, most businesses look at numbers, track KPIs, have business reviews, have some type of tools that really walk them through that funnel of whatever they're selling, right? And understand that. So I think it's really important that, orthodontists do that as well. And there's still, even though the business model on its own is very lucrative, there's still a lot of upside to continue to make it even more lucrative.
And I would say, don't let the overwhelm keep you down. Like, it's easy to just be always reacting and maybe thinking that you can't work on the business. And there are people like ourselves, Gaidge, there's consultants, there's people who focus on hiring, training team members. So it's easy to get overwhelmed and think about all these things. I mean, you mentioned hiring and keeping team members.
Yeah.
That's become a massive pain point, but there are people who can help you with that, and you don't have to do all of this yourself. And I think that's where most business owners get so overwhelmed. They're in the business, and how am I going to get all this done? But you have to be able to zoom out and take a deep breath and then find the right people to partner with, because at that $1.5 or $2 million practice, you do have the capital to invest back in the business. It may not be a ton of money, but there's going to be some. Yeah. And if you invest in the business, it's just going to pay dividends, like you're saying, just that 1%, just that 5%. It can be a huge growth.
The ROI on partnering with different partners in the industry is it's always there. It's always there.
Yep. So if viewers or listeners want to learn more about Gaidge, where should they go?
Well, thank you for listening to this. If you're here at this point of the podcast, I appreciate that. You would go to gaidge.com, and Gaidge is spelled GAIDGE.com. And right there, that will navigate you through the different offerings. And then it allows you to set up a demo with our team you can kind of take a deeper dive into the system. So that's the best way to get started. And that can be you can get a demo within a couple days. So,
Ryan, thanks so much for coming on the Grow Ortho podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.